chance. Tomas hurdles in. He scores! What a goal! He's from Carey Price and then the bar. Are you kidding me?
You must be kidding me.
Did you just do that, Alexander Barkov?
What a stop by Lundqvist! What a goal! It doesn't get any better than this.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. It's an Unsustainable Wednesday episode, the first one of the year. I'm your host, Gamby, with my co-host, Brandon, and if you've never tuned in to an Unsustainable Wednesday episode, let me break down exactly how it goes. So what we do is we take a look at the hottest and coldest players and give you a feel for whether that's sustainable or not. So let's say someone's doing really, really well. Are they actually going to sustain that heat, or are they going to fall back down to earth? And the same for the other side. If someone's playing poorly, they're maybe in a slump, we try to tell you, look, here's why we think the slump will continue or why it will not. So that's the very simple explanation of how we do this. It's a little bit more stats driven than our other episodes, so we get into a little bit to really give you reasonings as to why someone may break out of their slump or stay in their slump. But ultimately, it's really useful for helping you gauge whether to make a pickup or not, because usually when you're in the middle of thinking about making a pickup, you don't know if it's just a hot hand effect or not. And so the whole point of this episode is to guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, that's right. And I typically will go over at least partial of last week's suggestions that we made to see if we're on track or not. I think for this season, we used to go over every single pick, but I think for this season, we'll go over only the ones where we were either way off or right on, as opposed to kind of boringly going through a bunch of names you heard last week. But since there obviously is no Unsustainable Wednesday from last week, we're just going to jump right into this week's Unsustainable calls. And the first one I have on my list is a player that's been showing up quite a bit. It's probably one of the biggest names right now in Cody, Ceci.
Yep.
He's playing top pairing with Morgan Rielly over in Toronto. If you haven't been paying attention, Toronto's been scoring a lot of goals, which is unsurprising, as I think they were probably the highest projected goals for team in the league. Maybe Tampa, but I think it was Toronto for most analysts. Cody Ceci, all right, he's getting pretty good ice time. He's getting about 22 minutes and change, which is around what we'd see from him when he was in Ottawa. Obviously, a bit of a different role now. They're pairing him with Rielly, a little bit more offensive. He's only getting about 51% offensive zone starts, which is essentially half and half. They're basically playing him wherever, that pairing, which is a good sign for him as a player, I guess, how Toronto's treating him as both responsible in his own end and at least effective enough offensively. However, he has 3 points in 4 games, and that's why he's starting to make some tongues wag. He also puts up decent peripherals, especially in the blocks category. But I think it's getting a little overblown
Agreed.
here. He plays literally no power play, and he never will. There's 3 other defensemen in front of him, and that's possibly even more, depending on who else shows up on that right side.
I think Babcock would play on the power play before he does.
Right? Yeah. Like Tyson Barrie, Morgan Rielly, and Jake Muzzin are all clearly ahead of him for power play time. And they're already, since only playing one defenseman on each power play unit. Actually, even if they're playing 2, it's going to be Muzzin on power play 2 anyway. So Ceci will not be getting you power play points. And we've said time and time again, that is how you get the majority of your points as a defenseman. If you're not on the power play, you're looking at typically like a 30% difference on the power play. It's very, very tough to break through a 40-point barrier even if you have no power play time. So with the idea of him getting no power play, despite his strong start, I think something like a 30 to 35 point season is what you can realistically expect out of him. And he's going to get you okay peripherals. He's not a big shot guy, despite the fact he's come out with, actually, he's still not shooting right now, 4 shots in 4 games. So he's not going to get you a ton of shots. He's going to get you okay hits and okay blocks. Decent, I guess. But I still think Muzzin is the better option on the same team here if you wanted to stay with Toronto for some reason.
I actually think Ceci reminds me a little bit of Muzzin last year when Muzzin came over to the team and he was top pairing.
Yeah, but Muzzin was even in a better position last year than Ceci is, because he was getting power play too, and he does shoot a bit more. So I think the whole Ceci mania is a little overblown. He does, again, he has okay peripherals, and if you want to try to ride a hot hand, fine, but I wouldn't be putting any eggs into some long-term basket involving Cody Ceci. Not really his game plan. So just bear all that in mind, and if you need him for now, like, okay, but it's not a long-term play.
there honestly might be better options out there too than Cody Ceci, most likely.
Almost
I think,
certainly.
Like if you're getting him for peripherals, then I guess. But look, this 5-on-5 pace is just not going to continue. It's not who Cody Ceci is. He has a 25% shooting, of course. He has 1 goal and 4 shots, but still, just everything you're looking at with Cody Ceci is pretty unsustainable. What I chalk it up to with Ceci and the whole Ceci mania right now, in my opinion, is my mantra of people like to touch nice things. And the fact is that Cody Ceci's on Toronto.
God, we gotta hear it
and
again.
look, last year, Cody Ceci was on a 29-point pace. Okay, and if you're saying that Cody Ceci is going to end up at around 35 points or something like that, right? That's what you think. Career high for him, for one. And 2, his block pace is not that far off from last year's pace. So really, if you weren't going to touch him on Ottawa, which no one did last year, and now all of a sudden they're touching him because of Toronto, you've got to start to reevaluate things. If you weren't trying to grab him on Ottawa, there's no reason to grab him in Toronto. The minutes are the same, like you were saying. The on-ice shooting percentage is a little bit high at 11 or 12-ish% at the moment. The block pace is not that much better. It's maybe right now as it stands around 30 blocks better by end of year if it continued exactly as is. So I'm like you said, I'm not buying in at all to CC Mania. The next guy I'm not buying into here is Sammy Blais. Maybe one of the most talked about players. He was double added over Victor Olofsson yesterday. More people were adding Sammy Blais than Victor Olofsson. Can you believe that? That's insane to me. Now, in my opinion,
nuts.
if you're buying into Sammy Blais for peripherals, then fine. But his points, as they stand, are not sustainable. His minutes are already going down. He only played 11 minutes in the game against Toronto, and he's going to be in a dogfight soon when Robert Thomas comes back for that second line spot. He's shooting at around 50%, and yes, just like Cody Ceci, he has played literally 0 seconds of power play time so far, and I don't see him getting any power play time soon. Maybe second power play, but really in St. Louis, I don't care much for that second power play. That first power play is the one that does everything. So as far as Sammy Blais goes, if I don't understand why he's so highly added. Like, I get it if you're in a really deep league and it's a bangers league and all that. Like, yes, then it makes sense. Like, you're going for peripherals upside, and hey, right now he's getting points. Cool. But the truth of the matter is that for him to have, 9,000 ads or something yesterday, people are freaking out over him. More often than not, I'd say in probably 60% of leagues, and that's probably, honestly, too low. In 60%-ish of leagues, I wouldn't be adding him. I think there's most likely better options on the wire than Sammy Blais.
Yeah, and he only plays, 13 and a half minutes or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's actually...
He's not getting a ton of ice time.
It's more than last year, but it's still nothing. And I mean, last game, he only played 11.
All right, so my next one here is actually Matt Duchene over in Nashville. Now, I'm not saying that Duchene is going to have like a bad season or anything, but obviously 5 assists in 2 games rather is too high. But the thing that's concerning me is this secondary assist rate. So he's got 4 secondary assists over his 5 assists so far. I also think that his line is all right with Philip Forsberg and Mikael Granlund. I don't think it's like amazing. Although interestingly, on Daily Faceoff, it is the number 1 ranked second line, turns out.
Ooh.
But I think that he's going to need to get more primary assists and get some of his shots going in. I think he's more like a 60, 65 point guy this season. I don't want people seeing his start and thinking point per game out of him.
Yep.
I do like that he's getting 18 and a half minutes or so time on ice. But I just think, yes, there's a lot of players that have shown up with a ton of points. Mika Zibanejad is an easy example, or Anthony Mantha of players that could show up on this list right now. But Zibanejad, all of his assists are primary. So he's clearly like contributing to what is happening with the goals. Whereas Duchene has this huge glut of secondary assists, which is making me a little concerned that we're going to see him drop off sooner than later, and that we may not be seeing what's actually the potential of his line just yet.
Yeah, the other thing there is his on-ice shooting percentage is 16.67% at all strengths. So they're clearly scoring goals at a higher clip than expected while he's on the ice, and that probably is helping out that secondary assist rate. So if that comes back down to earth, he won't benefit as much. And you're right, I think the secondary assist rate is something to watch, and it's something that this early on in the season is not alarming. It's just one of those things where you're like, okay, hold your horses. I mean, last year he was at a 70-point pace, or 79-point pace, apologies, but he did shoot at 18%. And you know what he's shooting at right now? 0%. Does he only have 4 shots on goal? Yes. But you know what? He's shooting at 0%, and that's all that matters right now.
Yep.
Moving on, my next one is Blake Coleman. A lot of people are also freaking out about Blake Coleman. Maybe it's because of that ridiculous one-handed goal, which he's actually done before. So I guess that's like his thing. That's kind of like the OBJ catch of hockey. Just people aren't as familiar with it. So he's getting 22% offensive zone starts. That's really low. It's actually lower than last year, which is surprising. He was at 30% last year. So he's a little bit lower, playing more defensive, which makes sense because right now New Jersey has technically 2 scoring lines if Hughes ever figures out how to play hockey again. So there's not much you can do with Blake Coleman. Again, he reminds me of Sammy Blais in the respects that if you're buying in for peripherals and point upside, then cool. And this is kind of what I've said all season long, right? Some people I know in comments and whatnot have given me hell for recommending Blake Coleman and that his points are going to go down. And I know, I 100% drafted him with the idea that his points are going to go down and his time on ice is also going to come down. All I'm buying into is that peripheral upside. And then on top of that, you sometimes get points, or he goes on stretches like he is right now where he gets a lot of points. So with Blake Coleman, like I said, buy in for peripherals, nothing else, but his point upside right now is unsustainable, and he also gets 0 time on the power play, so there isn't too much to get excited about here at the moment. With Blake Coleman, I'd hold off a little bit. I wouldn't, drop anybody big for him. Maybe in the deepest of leagues, you can look at him and really pay attention to deployment also, because New Jersey is shifting around the lines a lot. But ultimately, the message with Blake Coleman is just you can wait a little bit, and it's okay if you miss out on him.
All right, let's look at the other side of this coin now and go to the unsustainably low players. These are the players that are playing a little worse than you might expect or are for some reason cause of panic already.
Yep.
And I'm going to go ahead and, since we already hinted at it, I'm going to talk about Jakub Voracek for a second.
That's a good one. With 1 game played.
Yeah, I don't even have anything to say. The guy played 1 game. Like, give him a break. Nothing is going wrong with him so far. He's playing top line, top power play. You can't ask for more except for Alain Vigneault to, swap Hayes and Couturier again. But even without that, his ice time is a little low. Only played 16 minutes or so in the first game, but it's 1 game. It's 1 game. There's no reason to drop Voracek, who could easily be a 70-point player this season, over 1 game where, it's 1 game. It's 1 game. Let's just chill on Voracek for a while. I don't think I really need to break anything up with that either. I mean, he's going to get as much power play time as you can. He's currently on the power play 66% of the team's time so far. He's getting opportunities. He's going to get points.
Yes, and that's the big thing. I mean, his power play percentage, like team's power play percentage, is so far higher than last year, even in that 1 game. Again, 1 game, right? But yeah, Jakub Voracek, for whatever reason, is the guy that I've seen the most questions about. Like, they'll see Olofsson, like, oh, should I drop Voracek for Olofsson? No, not yet. Just wait. Or not just Olofsson, but really any of these guys. You're seeing, the Sammy Blais, the Blake Colemans. You're seeing people want to drop, but it's 1 game. You can't make decisions on. I mean, even like at 3 games, it's really hard to make decisions on guys. You got to give them time. And really the only ones, like we said before and in the past episode, was unless it's like your last round pick, be patient.
Yep. I think that is something to be paying attention to when you're evaluating your players right now. I think a lot of GMs, especially newer ones, aren't paying attention to games played.
Yes.
Which is super important. Everything starts to kind of blend together as the season goes on and it stops being as interesting. But 1 game, right?
Yeah.
Certain teams have played 4.
Yeah.
So, like, how can you compare a player that has played 1 game to a player that has played 4 games?
Yep.
You just can't do it.
Correct. Now,
I mean, with that in mind, you'd think Claude Giroux is worse than Cody Ceci.
imagine actually thinking that, though. Where's Don Cherry?
I'm
interview
sure
him?
people are. I'm sure people are. Which is sad.
Yeah, very, very sad. But yeah, I mean, the games thing really matters. And a lot of people seem to think that, 1 game is very indicative of a player's future performance. That's just not the case. I mean, we see it so much where people are like, oh, but, he played 16. Yeah, but 1 game. So, we've said that a lot of times now, that 1 game thing. But, like, genuinely pay attention to games played this early, because you need at least, like I've said before in past episodes, you need about 10 games of information to really have someone kind of normalized. And especially, around 10 games in is when teams also kind of actually get their lines set and they feel comfortable running lines. Right now in these first 8 to 10 games, they're going to test a lot of things out to find what clicks and who has the best chemistry in real games, because a real game is very different from a preseason game as well. So it's very different to know your chemistry with a line. Moving into this next guy, it's somebody that we haven't been high on, admittedly, for pretty much the whole offseason, and maybe we underrated to an extent. Some people claimed we did, and that's Kevin Labanc. So a lot of people grabbed him late. And granted, I'm not as high on Labanc as everybody else, but he's shooting at the same rate as last year, healthy rate. And difference from last year is he's actually getting 43% more average time on ice so far. He's playing around 20 plus a night for over his last 2 games, and he's still practicing top line. So in my opinion, it's way too early to cut the cord with Labanc. I get it's been frustrating, but he's been shooting really high, which is good. He's also been playing a healthy amount of time on the power play. So there's not really any indicators when it comes to Labanc that he's sustainably low. It really seems more like Labanc is just in a little bit of a slump like the rest of the Sharks. All the Sharks are. And that's another thing from an evaluation standpoint to pay attention to early. My next player here will also factor into that. But it's when you're looking at when you're evaluating a player, especially this early with very few games, also take a look at the whole team, right? Because if you look at the Sharks, for example, the whole team has kind of slumped. Everyone has kind of looked bad as far as putting the puck in the back of the net. You look at someone like Brent Burns, and his production is still fine shot-wise, but he's not getting points. And a large part of that is just kind of team dynamics at the moment. So that's another thing from an evaluation standpoint is look at games played, but also look at the bigger picture. How is the whole team doing? Because a player is not just themselves. It's also how they work in this system. So when it comes to Labanc, in my opinion, right now, he's just dealing with the problem of the Sharks not being that good. And it's TBD if that's going to continue. I don't think it'll continue at the rate that it is right now, but everything else seems really healthy of him, and I think he's going to bounce back fine.
Yeah, he was like, I was one of the people that was a little down on Labanc coming into the season. I had a feeling he wasn't going to get a huge boost in ice time, which we are seeing. And I was worried about not getting top power play, which I still am a little bit worried about that because the original idea was with Kane, that Kane was going to be top power play. They're going to have Burns and Karlsson top power play, and Labanc and Meier were going to be relegated to second power play. Now, of course, Labanc, due to the lack of Kane-ness, got a bit of a bonus there on power play, but we'll have to see what happens now that Kane is back. That said, I still like Labanc to an extent. I still think he's being a little overrated, but I wouldn't drop him or anything. Staying with the Sharks, actually, I'll go ahead and talk about Timo Meier, who is basically in the exact same scenario. He's getting the highest average time on ice of his career, sitting at about 18 minutes 40 right now. But this is all the product of the same thing, right? We already mentioned it. The team right now is struggling a bit, haven't quite found their mojo, and everybody, as a result, especially Martin Jones, as usual, is feeling the effects. Timo Meier is no exception to the rule. I don't like the fact that he is shooting less than last season and he's hitting okay. The hitting's all right, but the fact that he's shooting less than last season is making me a little worried. I'm not that worried, honestly. We're talking about 3 games. He's a guy that can throw a 10 shot game out there and then all this looks great immediately, right? So I would relax with Timo Meier as well. I feel like I came into the season personally thinking of Timo Meier as a late 5th, early 6th guy in banger leagues, and I still feel like he's in that exact same position. I'm not, and with higher ceiling than that, like that. I feel like if you got him late 5th, that's where I was targeting him, and then I actually think he's worth more than that. But that was a good place to get him in the draft, and I still feel like if I knew this was going to be his first 3 games, I would still draft him in the same position. I'm not worried about Timo Meier long term. Yeah,
he's actually getting more time on the power play than last year too, almost completely double the time on the power play that he had last year, which is really, really good. So, and he has 2 shots on the power play so far, around the same percentage of power play shots. So I'm not, like you said, I'm as a Meier owner in like 4 leagues or something like that. I think I might have 3 actually, but of around 3 Timo Meier shares, I'm not too worried. It's frustrating, and I think that's another big distinction. Is there's a big distinction between a player frustrating you and genuinely playing poorly. And I think being able to recognize those two is very important, right? Like someone can frustrate you and someone could be completely tanking you. What Timo Meier and like Labanc are doing right now is frustrating, but it's not tanking. It is not awful. And another guy that's similar to that for me, who's my next guy here on Unsustainably Low, is David Pastrnak. And now usually we don't very often talk about the very, very high profile names here. But something that I do see very often at the early points of the season, and people ask us a lot, is you'll see guys like David Pastrnak, for example, right? You see him slumping early, and you'll see people trade this, first round pick essentially for a 3rd rounder. And they're like, well, whatever, but this 3rd rounder is doing way better, so he has a more upside. But that's not how it works. You got to be patient with him, and you've got to know what his value is. And to trade him this early for someone like that, the other owner is smart. That's exactly what they should be doing. They should be using their 3rd or 4th rounder to try to target a slumpy David Pastrnak. Pastrnak, and you'd be foolish to take that 100%. As far as him, the two things that are concerning, similar kind of to Timo Meier, is ice time and shot production through 2 games is concerning. It's low. His ice time is down to around 16 and a half-ish minutes, somewhere around there, and his shooting is lower as well. But his power play time is as high as ever, as are his zone starts. So, like always with a guy like him, you've got to be patient. You've got to wait out, especially this early. And look, this is one of the nice things too about an extended week, is in an extended week, you have even more room to be patient. And with a guy like David Pastrnak, take what you'd say for like a 10th rounder of being patient and extend that by about 10. And that's how patient you want to be. And granted, yes, then there's the argument of, well, then I can't sell him for as much later. But the whole point of a David Pastrnak is not to sell him. It's to get max value out of him. And usually with a guy like David Pastrnak, you're going to get the most value by playing him and by having him on your team, not moving him, especially at a low point. So, David Pastrnak, I'm not worried about him, but more than anything, I think it's a story of telling you, look, these high-end guys, some of them are going to slump early. And really with David Pastrnak, it's similar to Labanc, where Boston as a whole is not scoring a lot of goals right now. You look at Bergeron, you look at Marchand, and they're also not putting up points. And so that lends me to believe that it's not just David Pastrnak. It's just a team thing right now, and they'll figure it out. It goes back to Labanc thing, where when you're making these evaluations, don't just look at it as an on-player basis of saying, you know what, it's only David Pastrnak. When you extend the microscope a little bit, you see that it's actually affecting other players as well.
All right, I've got a couple more left, so I'll move right in. I won't take too long for these ones since we still have 2 sections left, but my first one here is John Klingberg. And this is, I feel like a lot of the guys we're talking about here are all symptoms of the same problem. And, well, the obvious problem is that we have very few games to talk about so far.
And Dallas sucks.
Klingberg. Yeah. Dallas has not been playing so well lately. I don't think they suck. I think they're really good. I just think they haven't got it together yet. There's been a lot of line shuffling so far, considering how few games. They played 3 games, and I swear Jamie Benn has been on 3 different lines so far.
I swear every other person in the hockey world, like their version of this is their year is Carolina or Edmonton, and yours is Dallas. Every year, Dallas is going to be good.
You know, I didn't like Dallas that much last year. I think Dallas last year is how I feel about Colorado this year. They have an amazing when they want to have, they have a very good top line, except for I don't know what's going on with Ben lately. At least last year, I thought they had a very good top line, as does Colorado, obviously, but they had no depth. And they went out and they got depth. Roope, I think.
Yeah, and then their depth broke his leg. So,
yeah, well, Roope Hintz and Joe Pavelski, still pretty good, and Heiskanen helps. Good things. And then Corey Perry, yeah, of course. Whatever. He was a gamble to begin with, but anyway, John Klingberg, 3 games in, he's shooting more than usual. He's doing everything he needs to do. It's just a matter of the players he's passing to scoring goals or coming off of his rebounds. I like the fact that I'm actually high on him more than I was at the beginning of the season so far. It just hasn't happened yet. And then my last one here is Sebastian Aho. Well, this is a little bit different because Carolina has not been struggling to score that much, but it's been coming off of basically everywhere else for whatever reason. The one thing that I don't like about what's happening with Aho right now is they're basically doing like a 1A, 1B with the power play at the moment. He's getting like half time. You'd like to see him get more like 60 to 70%, which is what I expected at the beginning of the season. That's not happening right now, but he's still playing 20 plus minutes. He's, shooting four times a game or more so far, which is a lot. All signs point pretty good other than the one about power play, but I'm not that worried about it. We're talking about 3 games in, so that can all change. They're still working out the system there, and they're still kind of trying to figure out that right wing why is it not Svechnikov, but whatever, for Sebastian Aho.
It does seem like that B power play has actually been way, way better than the A power play as well, which is the second one is Svechnikov, Haula, and Dougie Hamilton's power play.
I wonder, you think it has something to do with the quarterback that they've had for like
maybe
2 seasons now?
It's almost like Dougie Hamilton is good.
Who knew?
Weird.
It's almost like he shoots a lot and like can control play and I don't know. I don't even know who he is. I'm just making all this up.
Okay, let's move on to Sustainably High. Now, as if I needed to hype this player more, my first one is going to be, of course, Victor Olofsson. I have to talk about him. You can't not put him into this list. So Sustainably High, my first one is going to be Victor Olofsson. Everything you like to see in a hot hand. Like, seriously, aside from a high shooting percentage, although I'm kind of throwing out shooting percentage to an extent this early, he's everything you'd like to see. High minutes, increasing minutes as well as the games go on with more trust, high power play time on ice, high percentage of team shots on the power play, high zone start. Everything looks good. And you have the coach giving you praise in the media. Like, what more can you ask for from a guy? So I would expect less goals, obviously, in the long run, but he's a beast. And I don't really see...
Olofsson is... He's a Calder candidate, isn't he?
He played last year. I just don't know if he's eligible.
He only played 6 games last year. I think he's eligible still.
He might be eligible. I don't know.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's eligible, and I can't see... okay, this is a huge bet, right? But I don't see anybody even close to him at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that deployment is just so good. He's getting like 20 minutes a game. It's beautiful.
Yeah, like you look at the Quinn, the Jack Hughes, and well, I guess Quinn too, but is he considered a rookie?
He is.
Yeah, and the I mean, Makar is probably the closest at this point, and Kakko, they're not getting the deployment. Olofsson is getting the deployment in a big way. He's playing like 4 or 5 minutes a game more than his other rookie forwards. So, yeah, I really like what's going on with him, to say the very least.
Yeah, like honestly, with him from a Sustainably High perspective, like we said on Monday's episode, like you better hurry up and grab him if you can soon. And that doesn't mean like drop like a Voracek for him, but if you have room, you better go grab him ASAP because I don't think he's going to be there very long.
Yep. So another player that I feel like I would be throwing around in Calder conversation, except he is actually not eligible, is Roope Hintz.
Yep.
Just mentioned him. So I thought that he was not going to be super valuable in redraft leagues this season because I didn't see a way of him making it to that top power play. Although now, who knows what's going on with Dallas? Their power play is all over the place. They've essentially have a 1A, 1B, which is probably good news for Heiskanen owners and probably not so good news for just about everybody else. But Hintz has been the guy that's been making things happen. Pretty much the only guy that's been making things happen. He's getting over 17 minutes a game so far, which is more than I expected. A little bit. I expected him to be a 16 to 17 minute a game guy, and we're seeing a lot more than that. Now, he does have 3 goals, so obviously his shooting percentage is an astronomical 60%, which is too high. But he's going to get to play with a very good winger in either Pavelski or Radulov, hoping Pavelski can figure it out a little bit going forward. And he's going to be on a good power play, even if they do keep up this 1A, 1B thing. He's in a better position than I expect him to be at the beginning of the season. I think he's going to continue to contribute. I don't think he's a point per game player or anything crazy like that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him land somewhere in the mid-60s, which is much better than I thought coming into the season.
So while everyone is paying attention to one wing on Buffalo, there's another player on the other side called Sam Reinhart, who's also playing spectacularly, playing more average time on ice last year, and seems to be the one lock on Eichel's wing for now. Not saying Olofsson's not, but if they were going to make a change, it would obviously be Olofsson coming off at the top line. I mean, let's be real there. So Reinhart seems to be that lock. His shots are right in line with last year. Same average power play time on ice as last year. His on-ice shooting percentage is pretty high right now, but that'll normalize with time. But with how hot that Eichel and Olofsson connection is, and the fact that Reinhart is getting a lot of power play time on ice too, he shouldn't be underrated here. You should be paying attention to him, especially if you're in a shallower league. He's someone that's interesting, solely because of deployment. He reminds me a little bit of a Anze Kopitar, in the sense of people just kind of forget he exists and that he's good. Like, he does enough, and he's usually serviceable enough to be kind of a high upside guy on certain weeks, and he's one of those guys too that you can drop, and honestly, when he's not hot, people aren't going to rush to grab him. He's just one of those players that you can grab when he's hot and drop when he's not, and just kind of move around. And right now, to me, Sam Reinhart is sustainably high. As long as Eichel and Olofsson continue to play the way they are, I 100% want a piece of that with Sam Reinhart.
Yeah, I don't know if you could drop him in most 12-man plus leagues at this point, but
not at this point. But I think there was definitely a point last year where he was so there was cold, where that's the thing is, I feel like when Reinhart goes cold, he goes really cold, and so you drop him and no one wants to touch him, no one wants a piece. But then when he's hot, you also have like a little bit of time to grab him for whatever reason. Right now he's 59% owned, so he's pretty high going into the season, which he was last year as well. But during that slump, he was one of people's first drop candidates. I remember that last year, that as soon as he kind of started to slump, people would drop him for that next hot hand. So he's someone to pay attention to, and for right now, if he's available in the league, I really like his upside.
My last one is actually Auston Matthews.
I hate this.
I'm gonna let that sink in for a second.
I hate how wrong I was right now.
What?
I hate how wrong I was right now. I didn't think he'd continue
What'd you
scoring
think?
like this. I mean, to be honest,
yeah.
in my opinion, I almost put him on unsustainably high, so I'm curious to see why you have this take.
Okay, so this is why. Obviously, he's not going to score 90 goals, right? But he's got 5 goals in 4 games. His shooting percentage at 26% is not as high as I expected it to be with that many goals scored.
Yep.
So, yeah, he's going to... I mean, there's no doubt that his goal scoring is going to come down. But what is interesting about Auston Matthews right now is his IPP. This means the amount of goals that are scored when he's on the ice that he is a part of. His IPP percentage is 62%.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. You'd expect somebody with Matthews' skill to be probably at least 70.
He finished 80% last year.
Yeah, you expect to be 70 plus, right? So if you were to, okay, let's assume that it was 80%. You'd not only would you see these 5 goals, you'd see probably 3 assists in there. So it's pretty crazy if he were to be up to where he was last season. So he does have the ability to be in on more points than he is. I bet you we'd see some tertiary assists if we were to look that far with him.
What's crazy too is actually his percentage of shots on the power play of his team are actually higher than last year. Last year he shot about 15% of his team's power play shots. This year so far he's shot 27% of them. So they're clearly using him as a sniper because I mean he does have that wicked release and he's using it effectively. I think a big question mark here is going to be how much can it continue? His pace right now, honestly, isn't that far off from last year's either. He's at 103-ish point pace at the moment. Last year, he was on pace for 88, so he's doing better than last year. One other thing, too, to point to that's helping him out quite a bit is his power play shooting percentage is high right now. But the crazy thing about Auston Matthews, now that I'm looking at his numbers here, is actually, like you said, the most impressive thing is that the numbers aren't that far off from last year. They really aren't. That's terrifying.
And his IPP being low is what really stuck out to me.
I mean,
the fact that he technically should have more points.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
I mean, his power play shooting percentage last year was 21%, which granted is a little high, and it's at 28.5% right now. So a little bit high. His percentage on the power play is still around the same. The crazy thing, too, is his on-ice shooting percentage is not that much higher. It was 10.8% last year, and right now it's at 13.6%. So Auston Matthews is most likely going to continue to terrify you in matchups for the rest of the year.
Yep. So one other thing you can kind of point to is maybe a little bit of regression is the amount of power play opportunities that Toronto's gotten. I didn't see how many they got in their last game, but they had 15 in the first 3, which we mentioned last episode, which is a lot. Yeah. That's a lot. So, and especially coming from Toronto, who historically do not get very many power plays, bottom of the league last season. So that might be an area where you might see a little bit of kind of regression, normalization. But
so one thing on that
Auston
too.
Matthews is really good.
So Auston Matthews is getting around the same average time on ice in general. So he's playing around the same amount of time. But one of the big differences is he's actually playing around 37% more time of that time on ice. Around 40% more is spent on the power play than last year.
Yeah, all the same thing. It's all volume.
Yeah,
right?
so he's playing way more time. He's getting way more power play, like you said, opportunities and time on ice, which matters a ton, especially for those goals. Yeah. So I'm curious to see.
I do think you'll see that changing a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to get 5 power plays a game.
Again, remember, I think he'll regress. I think that the reason I said early in the season that I think he was overrated was that, last year he was on 88-point pace. I think that really his pace is around, 88 to 95, somewhere around there. And so I don't think it's that different from what we're seeing. I think what we're seeing is kind of exactly what you expected from Auston Matthews. And I think it's TBD on whether or not that's actually worthy of a first-round pick at the end of the day compared with whatever comes out, like however Ovechkin does. And right now he would be, I think, especially given how much he's shooting and how many power play points he has. But again, TBD towards the end of the year. But you know what? I've got to admit I was wrong so far. And I'm still not going to turn my back on saying that he's not a first round pick. I'm not going to turn my back on that because that's a comparable question compared to other centers that go around there. But I will say that I agree with you. He is sustainably high and a monster.
I also looked up, they got 2 power plays. So they've had 17 power plays in the first 4 games.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move on to sustainably low?
We should.
So all the bums. So let's start with all the bums. Okay, my first bum here is going to be Nazem Kadri. I actually, funnily enough, I was checking. I was looking at my sheets last year, my notes, and for this same exact episode, the first Unsustainable Wednesday episode from last year, I actually had Nazem Kadri in the same exact spot. So yet again, I have Nazem Kadri in the same spot at the first episode of the year. And last year, it proved correct, even though it was early. Now, I'm having the same exact ruminations this year because of almost the exact same reasons.
Ruminations.
Yes, I used a
SAT
dictionary.
words, everybody.
Yes,
Learn 'em
SAT
here.
words. This is also a good podcast, actually, to help your education. You're welcome.
Yeah.
So
Just not your pronunciation of European last names.
no. Forget pronunciations. Those aren't on SATs. So that's why we don't talk about that. But look at that stats usage, the word ruminations. That all of that is in here. So for the same reason as last year, Nazem Kadri's kind of made this list yet again early in the season, because what I expected from him was to get a better deployment now that he's on Colorado in that second line, and they were going to trust him with a little bit more. The problem is his minutes are low, almost exactly the same as last year. And he hasn't really factored in much into the power play offense. So it's early, but he's an early candidate in my opinion to place on a chopping block if need be. He's owned at around 60%, which in my opinion is just way too high, especially when you factor in that a guy like Sam Reinhart is 60% at the moment. Now, I get that one of the reasons people like holding on to Nazem Kadri is that peripherals. But the problem with Kadri is that his peripherals aren't that elite compared to other players. Now, he has had 5 hits so far, which isn't bad. But if you are going for simply peripherals, honestly, I'd rather have Blake Coleman. I'd rather have a Blake Coleman than Nazem Kadri if you're just going for peripherals and the same kind of similar points upside. If you look at the time on ice last year, the difference between last year's average time on ice and what he's getting right now is only 2% less. And that's concerning to me because all of us expected that him going to Colorado was actually going to help him and help his time on ice. The place where he has gotten quite a bit of help is his average power play time on ice has actually doubled. So that's good. His power play time on ice has doubled on Colorado, but the problem, of course, being that he's not playing a very efficient power play spot. And especially when you have shooters like McKinnon and Rantanen and Landeskog, you don't really need that much net front presence as far as like a stuffing play. Like for the most part, you're going to have him screening and not really a stuffer. Like usually if you don't have the best shooters, you're going to go for that rebound and have that person in the front of it, kind of like a Duchene, like just kind of punches it into the net, plays the screen.
He's
and
also not the best
it.
tipper in the world.
No. So
he's not a Pavelski. He's not an Anders Lee. It's not.
Yeah. So the chance that you're looking at Kadri getting a ton of power play points right now, I don't see it. And so I'm seeing the same exact issues and the same numbers are standing out to me. His shots have also gone down by about 20% so far. So I'm seeing the same markers as last year when he was on Toronto and we said, you know what, this is a little bit worrying with Nazem Kadri. I'm seeing that yet again. And so I would say that right now, as it stands, it would not be far-fetched, in my opinion, to say maybe you should start thinking of dropping Nazem Kadri in like a week or so. Maybe give him a week, but honestly, if in a week, if you don't see things start to change, I wouldn't blame you if you start to think about dropping him or shopping him. I would shop him first, of course, see if anyone else is high on him. But you know what? At this point, I think he can do better.
Yeah, I agree. My first one, I hate that he's on this list, and I really hope that he's not on it for long. But funny that I'm going to mention a player that's only played one game, Sean Couturier.
Yep. This is fair.
I hate that he's on this list. He shouldn't be on this list.
He shouldn't.
If you look at his chart on HockeyViz, his chart is pretty much the same as Mark Stone's.
Yep.
It's really amazing. He's like a plus 20. This chart basically it shows a heat map. You might have to be a patron for this actually, but it shows a heat map of your offensive isolated as best they can. It's algorithmic to figure out what the isolated impact of an individual is. So isolated impact in the offensive zone, which will show threat, which is essentially, I think it's unblocked shots. Unblocked shots in the offensive zone and where they come from. And his are like dark red in front of the net. So most of his are coming from dangerous areas, and he's a plus 20% threat, which is a very high number. And then it shows the defensive side of it. And you want to see blue there, low shot volumes, and especially in front of the net, which is exactly what you see with Couturier. And he's like minus 18% defensively. Those numbers are staggering. And there's hardly anybody in the league that can do that.
If your eyes glazed over during all of that, pretty much all that means is Couturier is a good hockey player.
A good two-way player, but also not like two-way doesn't even do justice.
No.
Like, yes, he's a good defensive and offensive player, but he's elite in both zones.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part. So he's on the Sustainably Low list, unfortunately, and that is because he's been relegated to second line for some reason. And Lindblom, as good as he is a huge downgrade to Claude Giroux.
Just a bit.
And we're seeing him on power play too, which why?
I mean,
Kevin Hayes is no slouch in his own right, but Couturier is a better Hayes. So it's annoying, but with this deployment, he's not going to get that point per game pace that we're expecting from him. Now, I don't want to instill fear here. I'm not saying panic and trade him or drop him or whatever. It's just that if this continues, and especially if Hayes starts clicking, I might start looking to shop Couturier before things get worse.
Yep. And the thing too is Couturier didn't go that early in drafts, so there's a good chance that you can get pretty good value at this point for Couturier so far, and actually kind of recoup your value. And going back to that power play thing, I mean, he's on second power play, and his power play time on ice so far has dropped 50%. That is not good. He only plays 30.
Yeah, I mean, it's only been a game.
It's only been a game, granted, but and we'll see what happens. I mean, as a Rangers fan and former Alain Vigneault hater, I know that he loves Kevin Hayes, and I also know that I'm not a big fan of Kevin Hayes, and I think that Couturier could outdo Kevin Hayes and deserves that spot over him. And so I think this will turn around, I hope, but it is very worrying, like you said, and a lot of the markers point to this being bad for him.
Yeah, I would give him October at least before you start like actively trying to shop him, because if he gets that top line, he's going to be right back to where he was. They're still clearly willing to play him plenty of time. Last season they really leaned on him playing about 22 minutes a game. Now he's playing more like high 19s, probably low 20s, which is a ton for a forward. So clearly still a lot of trust in him, but his deployment is just suffering.
Yep. My next one here is going to be a goaltender, and that's going to be Jonathan Quick. Jonathan Quick is suck, as Ovechkin would say.
He is suck, unfortunately.
He is definitely suck. He was awful in his first game. I mean, just terrible.
Jack Campbell starting. Well, this is Tuesday night, but Jack Campbell gets the net. We'll see how he does.
Awful. Look, the problem with the reason I'm putting Quick on this list as sustainably low is that he was also awful through the preseason. Like, I remember showing Brandon a chart on Frozen Pool, which is Dauber's tools, and he was all the other goaltenders had like above 910 save percentages, and then there was Quick with like an 880. I was like, what the hell? And he had played more games. So it's insane that, he played awful in preseason. The markers were there to say, you know what, something's up. And then he played awful in that first game against Edmonton. And so I think something to watch is Jack Campbell, who's actually very good. And I could see 100% stealing the starting net. He was really, really good last year, hands down, and like unequivocally. Yep, I tried too hard. Unequivocally played better than Jonathan Quick last year, without a doubt. And so I think that this is the year Jack Campbell could definitely steal a net, and that's something to pay attention to. That being said, being the netminder behind the Kings is not exactly a coveted role, not one you should really be eyeing to hold, as far from a fantasy perspective. But nonetheless, like, especially if you're going to save percentage of goals against average league, I think you do much better with Jack Campbell in net. And this is virtually just saying, you know what, right now, I would have liked right now to be saying this is Jonathan Quick's revival. I see it. But after that first game, I just don't see a way in hell right now he's going to turn it around unless something drastically changes.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, I wish I could disagree with you, because I've been a big Quick fan for a long time. He's one of the most entertaining goalies to watch, but it just looks like the time is over.
Yeah.
Sucks, honestly. All right, my next two are going to make a lot of people mad. I'm just going to combine them because they should be combined.
I'm going to plug my ears for a second.
Yeah, Kaapo, Kakko, and Jack Hughes. Now, again, I'm not trying to totally doomsday the situation. I have shares of both players in my leagues, and I haven't dropped either one yet. And a big but, they both are playing not good minutes, to say the very least.
Yeah.
Kakko is playing, he played, I think, 15 minutes his first game, then 13. Ugh. And then we saw similar with Jack Hughes, dropping down to 14 minutes in his last game. That's what's bothering me.
Yikes.
Is the drop in ice time from game to game. Now they've only played 2 games each, but starting out at 15 is not a high number, and dropping from that is not a good indication of what's happening. Now, the hope originally was that Kakko was going to play top line and top power play rather with Zibanejad and Panarin. That has not happened. Not a lot going on in the second line so far, and Jack Hughes is now on the third line playing with Simmons and Coleman. Yeesh. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I don't necessarily hate it, but I don't think it's good for fantasy.
It's awful for fantasy.
And he's also obviously not playing top power play. Weirdly, neither of him or Hischier are playing top power play right now, which is mind-blowing, but that's another question. Anyway, both of them need a serious change, or there's going to be problems for them in redraft leagues, to say the very least.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think the difficulty with a guy or guys like Kakko and Hughes are that they're not guys you can drop and hope they'll be on the wire later. They're guys that 100% you drop and someone will stash them. And so it's really just what are you okay missing out on? I mean, at this point, I think if we get into, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks into the season and the same things are happening, then you're looking at an upside that's quite low for both of them. Very rarely do you see a rookie kind of supplant, let's say, Nico Hischier, for example, once they haven't done stuff in the first 3 weeks. Like, the odds of them supplanting as top center for Nico Hischier this year would be extremely low. I mean, even at this point already, I'd say I just don't see it. And the same for Kakko. I mean, Kakko has a little bit of a different situation because Buchnevich is very hot or cold. He can go stretches being very cold. And last year, even David Quinn benched him a few times. So, like, Kakko, I'd say, has more of an upside in terms of Buchnevich screwing it up than Nico Hischier does. So I would say, again...
Than Jack Hughes does, you mean?
No, Kakko has more of a chance of supplanting that top line spot than Hughes does.
Than Jack Hughes does of Nico Hischier.
Yes, exactly. So...
Yeah,
I would hold still simply for the reason that, look, their upside at the very moment is still decent, but that upside starts to decrease every single game that this happens, and that their minutes start to decrease, and you see their lines not be as good. Every time you see that, you start to go down. And another thing that I don't like here is, especially for Hughes, is they split up him and Gusev, and they moved Hughes down and Gusev up. That's not great. So clearly I think management is looking at it and saying, you know what, Hughes is not defensively good. So we're going to put him with guys like Coleman and Simmons who can help him with that and let him be more offensive. And so maybe this is good for him. That third line may be good for him in that it unleashes an ability for him to be offensive, but it does mean just overall less minutes. And that second power play is garbage. So I wouldn't really want to be on that second power play.
Will Butcher is back on it, by the way.
Yay.
Severson got dropped off second power play.
Will Butcher. I hope we never have to speak his name.
I don't know
again
why,
on a
honestly.
fantasy
At this
podcast.
point, Severson is better than Butcher. So.
I agree. Okay, so my next one here is actually somebody that I've seen a lot of people drop, and then people say, "Oh my God, this guy's dropped. Do I have to go grab him quick?" And I'm like, "No, slow down. Don't go. It's okay." And that's Bo Horvat. Yeah, I love him too. He's good. Yeah. Here's the thing: subpar second line. He's playing with Tanner Pearson and Michael Furland. His minutes are down around 16% so far through 2 games. He's on a second power play that's just atrocious. I mean, aside from
I think they moved that. I think they put him back on top.
Nope.
From what last I heard.
Nope, he is not. I have Daily Faceoff right here in front of me. He's playing with Tanner Pearson, Michael Furland, Tyler Myers, and Quinn Hughes on the power play. Aside from Hughes and Horvat, that second power play is bad, and I don't think it's going to get much time. Here's maybe a little bit of a hot take. But in my opinion, Bo Horvat last year is not as good if Elias Pettersson doesn't get injured. Last year, you do not pick up Bo Horvat while Pettersson is healthy. While Pettersson was healthy,
I would agree with that.
Horvat was droppable. And I think the same exact thing is going to happen this year. And the difference is, too, that last year, if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and look. I don't have it right in front of me. But last year, Horvat was on the top power play with Pettersson for a while. This year, he is not on the top power play. So in my opinion, we're seeing people overreact to Horvat's end of the year when Pettersson was out and then came back kind of still injured, while forgetting that while Pettersson was healthy, Horvat sucked. And no one wanted him. He got dropped all over, and no one even touched him. And I think the same thing is going to happen.
Horvat is top power play, by the way.
Oh, he is now. I guess
our little bot.
I guess daily.
Our little bot.
Oh, our bot
retweeted it 3 hours ago.
Thank you, FHP bot. Okay, so he's back top power play. That being said, I'm still low on him, mostly because of his 5-on-5 time. And again, just going back to that factor of that last year when Pettersson was healthy, you didn't want Horvat, and I don't think you're going to want him this year either. So I don't think it's so when you're seeing Horvat drop, this is I think my take on this is when you're seeing him dropped, it's not preposterous. I don't think it's insane to see Horvat dropped right now, especially given that he's a center. There's a lot of other hot centers out there right now that are getting better deployment than Bo Horvat. So that's why I have him on sustainably low. Now, again, now that he's top power play, fine.
Furland rather lost his second. He dropped from first line to second line for like a second, and now he's on the third line.
Eesh.
It's actually Levo.
Oh, okay.
With
So
Horvat and Pearson now.
Cool. So Horvat's situation gets even worse at 5-on-5.
Yeah, it's not good. It's really not good.
Oh boy. So yeah. So I think that people are people are kind of overreacting, I think, to Horvat being dropped. I see it every single day in our Discord, pretty much. People freaking out about Horvat being dropped, and I don't think it's as crazy as it seems. I think he's kind of like a Nazem Kadri to me in that situation, where it's just someone that, yeah, he's good and he could be a great fantasy asset, but he's just not in the position to do so. And if you're behind someone like Elias Pettersson, sorry, man, you're just not going to produce at fantasy.
Yep, unfortunately.
And that is it. After all my Bo Horvat hate and angering the entire city of Vancouver, I will be locking my door tonight with a deadbolt and a chair underneath the handle. But other than that, that is the episode.
It's a long flight, at least.
It is a long flight.
From Vancouver.
So I think I'll have a little bit of time, but who knows? There's a lot of Vancouverites here in New York City as well. So thank you for listening. Next time we'll do this a little bit more as a mailbag episode. Again, remember, if you haven't already, join our Discord. We have almost 1,000. Yes, 1,000 fantasy hockey fans who have not picked up Sammy Blais yet. They are fantastic people, so be sure to join that on fantasyhockeypodcast.com or on our Twitter at fantasyhockeypd. And we will be catching you Friday for our week review and weekend preview.
I think a good amount of them did pick up Sammy Blais. All right, thanks for listening.